Good afternoon. Hi, my name is Vik Muniz. I am a visual artist, and I have been a visual artist for the last 35 years, When I started making art, all I wanted to be was an artist. And this is the case for most people, You want to become an artist. You want to become known. You want your ideas to be out there. And 20 years down the road, you're already an artist. And then you ask yourself a question: what is it that I do? What is it worth it? What is it good for? I think I asked that question too many times until I had an idea a few years ago to do an experiment. I got to meet a whole bunch of people who worked in an enormous garbage facility in Brazil. And I asked them to come to my studio and work on their own portraits, but working as a material, the things that they used every day, working with recyclables. That work became a film. They got an Oscar nomination. I didn't expect that, but did a lot of other things. It wasn't until then, and I had already worked with diamonds, with garbage. I had made works that were kilometers long. They had to be photographed with a helicopter. Things that were tiny, they had to be photographed with an electron microscope. But it wasn't until then that I realized that I was doing all these different works because each material required a different process. And I got to meet different people every time I did. Then it comes to why I started focusing on working with people and bringing people into my working process. But I did many things. I'm not going to list that. It was amazing. It was life-changing for me to realize that art was made of people. And it all became meaningful, and I could sustain my activity as an artist. And other things happened from the film. I was doing a book sign at the public library in New York City some years ago. And this really amazing character appeared to me, bright-eyed, and he gave me like a 15-second pitch saying that he was inspired by the film and that he wanted to do work with people. He was working with people in situations of danger, and then until somebody ushered him out because he didn't buy the book. It was a really rainy night, and I remember 1 hour later, we were on the last people to leave the place, and Max was like in a ledge, and he said, "Hey, I'm still here." And then he came and talked to me, and again, there was this, he was a hurricane of information. And I said, listen, it's raining. It's raining on us. Come to my studio next week, and I think I have an idea for us to do something. I run a non-for-profit school in Brazil, and I said, maybe you can teach there. Then I meet that guy. I realized that he was an amazing teacher. He had this empathy, this way of actually connecting with kids that I was struck. And we started a relationship. We did a program with Yale at the school that's in a favela. It's one of the biggest favelas in Rio. And Max was there, and he changed everybody's mind. It was magical, and we became friends. And time went by. He went there several times, and they were always magical and successful until he started sending me these drawings. They were very enigmatic, and then I didn't know what they were, and then I asked him what they said. These are drawings by Rohingya refugees. And then realizing how ignorant I was about the whole thing, I went into the internet to look for Rohingya culture. Well, as it happens, since 1963, this group, this minority, has been so repressed that has not any trace or evidence of their culture in the internet. I Googled it, and the only thing that appeared were the drawings that Max was doing with this group. And I called him. I said, "Is this right?" I tried Rohingya. I thought I was misspelling the thing. I tried many spell, and it was actually true. Max had gone there, recruited a group of people, half men, half women, and had started to empower them as a cultural agents. He didn't call them students. He didn't call them teachers. He called them artists. And he convinced them persuaded them that they were not only artists, but they were important for cultural change in the particular environment. He came, he invited me to come, and I thank him so much for doing this, because Kutupalong Balokali is the largest refugee camp in the history of mankind. And working there was fascinating. Working with Max and seeing what he was doing, again, and bring me that idea of how, why is it to be an artist, and what do I do, and what's the importance of what I do. Max, Dr. Max Frieder, has written enormously about it. And I stop talking right now because I know that he has a lot more to say than I do. Here's Max.
So, hello everybody, welcome. How are you doing? How are you doing? Amazing, amazing. So my name is Dr. Max Frieder. What an amazing introduction. And far more important than anything I could say to begin with is we should start with Dildar. This is Dildar, and she is here in the room with us. And I want to start with the story of Dildar. So Dildar is an incredible woman that I met working in the Rohingya refugee camps, and she opened up and told me her story. She started in Rakhine State, which is on the border of Myanmar in Bangladesh, or on the border of Bangladesh. And she had this amazing story where her whole village, she lived in a tiny little village, and her village was burned. And she watched her father get murdered, and her best friend was raped and then murdered. Her husband was tortured and then was captured, and she still doesn't know where he is till this day, and she fled. Now, when she fled with her special needs brother, her sister, and her grandmother and mother, they used to dig holes in the ground, and then they would cover themselves in dirt and sticks and rocks to be able to hide from the military junta during the daytime, and at nighttime they would run. They did this for 2 weeks to get over the mountains into the border of the Naf River. They actually hand wove a raft out of bamboo, and they floated across the river to be able to get into what has become the largest refugee camp in human history, with almost 1.2 million people who live there, and this is what it looks like. Now, if you can imagine, when she got across, she had to wait for days at the border trying to get across. And when she was able to get in, she had such severe trauma, she had what we call shock-based mutism. She did not speak for 9 months. She came and worked with us on a program, and she painted for the first time in her life. And when she painted, she spoke for the first time in 9 months. And the first words that she said was that, I didn't feel that I've been alive for the last 9 months. I forgot what it felt like to be alive. And this is the first time I'm feeling, that energy, that light. And she said, I need to share this with others who've been through this silence. I need to take this feeling and I need to share it with the thousands of others who have felt this silence, and the children around the world, around the camp, who are feeling this silence. And so she started working with us. And then 4 years later, she is now our lead teaching artist trainer. She is, yeah, right? For Dildar, right? And she is now teaching others how to be able to take their stories and to be able to put them on walls, to build giant sculptures out of trash and recycled materials, to be able to do performances and puppetry and dance, and to be able to take this energy and to be able to share. Now, I was actually in the Rohingya refugee camps only 5 days ago, and what was amazing is I worked with an artist named Samira that she taught. And Samira had never had the opportunity to make art ever in her life. She was never even allowed out of her home. And then when she started painting, she was incredible, this amazingly talented woman. And when she started painting, she ended up making this beautiful image of this little girl. And I asked, Samira, what is this piece? Tell me about it. She said, this is my sister. I haven't seen my sister in 5 years, and I forgot what her face looked like. This is the first time I'm seeing her face, and I don't know if she's still alive, but through art, I am able to believe that her soul is still alive inside of me. This is the gift that art can give. And when we look, one of the things that's crazy to imagine is that this is a single story about one girl, about one woman, about Dildar, and she is here with us in this room today. She cannot be able to actually be here. She's in a locked refugee camp. But we need to do her justice by being able to bring her voice into this space. And this is the Rohingya refugee camp. And if you see these tiny little elephants that are here, this is a representation of what the reality is today. There's over 100 million displaced people in the world today. Now, if we think about that one story of Dildar, and then we multiply that by 100 million people, that's an unfathomable number of people around the world, an unprecedented rate. And yet when we look at that, we have to think about that one little girl or that one person and their story. Now, how can we be able to humanize the best of humanity? Comes through the arts and culture and creativity and expression. Now, when we look at what's possible, this to me is one of the things that's not the first thing you imagine when you think of refugee children. We've seen so many images of poverty, of challenges, of trauma, and yet the reality is that this is what we should think of when we think of refugee children. Someone that could be your son, somebody that could be your daughter. And then when we look at this is that same energy that we see all over the world. What do we see in these different faces? We see this joy, right? We see this unrelenting resilience, true resilience, which at its best is what the arts are able to bring. Whether it be on the Venezuelan border in Colombia, whether it be in the Rohingya camps, or on the border of Syria in Jordan, or whether it be on the border of South Sudan in Uganda. This is what Artolution does. So I'm the co-founder and chief creative officer of Artolution, and we work with Vik, who is our global ambassador. And one of the things that me and Vik did is we started to collect drawings, thousands of drawings of kids from when they crossed over the border, starting with the genocide coming all the way till today, with fires and monsoons and the floods that exist at an unprecedented rate. And what they did is they started to make these drawings. So we took the drawings and we put them all together, and then we actually got a map from 1498, and we transferred it on top of it, and then we sent that image back to the camps and got them to be able to track their routes of where they actually came from in what was ancient Arakan, modern day Myanmar, and was able to go into Bangladesh. And this image is called Lines, and it's the first of a much larger project that we are doing this all over the world with Vik and myself, and it is outside, and I recommend everyone to check it out. These artifacts of time that are existing here for the first time ever in the history of Davos. And when you look at it, for us, Artolution is an international community-based public arts and education organization. So what we do is we teach artists and educators in different refugee camps and conflict zones around the world how to be able to create large-scale artworks to tell stories, to heal, to be able to look at how can we take the best of humanity and to be able to take it in the most difficult places. And yet people who might be in the worst times in their life, that the arts bring out the best in them. And that now we've grown to be over 120 artists around the world working in 5 major regional hubs around the globe. Now, for me, I love this image, and one of the reasons why is because if we look at this, what we need to see is that we can look at people as humans, as humanity. How do we humanize in what seems like such a dehumanizing situation? And that's what the color of resilience came out to be able to be birthed from. So in collaboration with the World Economic Forum, we were able to create a piece of artwork where we were able to take all of these different stories, and we were able to actually have refugee artists and children, over 500 from around the world, to be able to create 4 different chapters of a single story, all about where did we come from, how did we get to where we are today, and what are our dreams for the future. Now, when we look at this, one of the biggest and most incredible things is that now our teaching artists are able to train others how to do this, but they're also able to express their stories. And when we look at cognition, when we look at mental health or education, when we look at the importance of clean water, it has to come through the idioms of expression from local cultures. It needs to be something that's coming from cultures advocating for themselves on a global scale. And that this is the first chapter of The Color of Resilience, which came from the Rohingya refugee camps. And when you look at this imagery, there's something of where they came from, where they are now, and this is an image that Dildar painted of herself. And that in the future, the idea is that this is what real freedom can look like. Now, if we transport ourselves, the Color of Resilience actually goes in a geographic route all around the world. So this is transporting us to Colombia on the border of Venezuela, and I can introduce you to Yole Dimar. Yole Dimar was one of our participants within the program, and when we asked her what's important to her, she said, I'm embarrassed that we had to leave Venezuela, that I couldn't stay with my friends and that my family had to flee. And I'm embarrassed that we couldn't stay. And yet, by being able to draw, by being able to create, I'm no longer embarrassed. Now I'm proud that I have a voice. Now, all of these folks have voices. It's just how do we amplify them? How do we take them to a point where we're able to bring them both across their own communities? But what does it mean to bring it here to the World Economic Forum? And what it means is it's a statement that these people matter, that their stories matter, that they have a seat at the table, and that that seat matters. And that by being able to value their lives, we are saying that the global displacement crisis is not just a random and non-humanized 100 million people. These are real people like Yole Dimar. And we see this idea of the bird of the future that was created by both Colombian and Venezuelan communities together. Now, this is the largest refugee settlement in Africa, called the Bidi Bidi Refugee Settlement, where we have our programs. And when you look inside of it, what's amazing is we've been able to paint all the schools within this area, working with thousands of children every year. We have over 30 artists here. And what's been remarkable is to hear about their stories. This is a man named Gift. And Gift Jantoli, who's an amazing man, his dream was to become an artist, a photographer. And he had to flee becoming a child soldier on the border of South Sudan. And when he came over, he had severe depression and didn't know if he wanted to continue to live. And he shared that when he had the experience to be able to work with his community, to paint giant images, to build sculptures out of trash, to be able to video his work, he said, actually, my life is worth living. I have a reason to wake up in the morning. Because art gives us a reason to live. It's a reason that we can connect. And we look as we built giant elephants out of trash that we were able to all play with musical instruments as a musical instrument with drumsticks, teaching about conservation, sustainability, recycling. And when we look at this work, we even built a giant bull, which all the different groups that exist in South Sudan all value the cow. So being able to say that a cow is a way for us to connect with each other and a way to be able to develop meaning. And this was the piece that they created, which I think is absolutely remarkable. When you look inside of this, what's amazing is that this is a hand holding a candle. And this idea of a candle, of this was our hope for the future. And on the other hand, we have a home, this iconic image of what all people dream of, which is a home. And that image is that this is what our dreams were, and it's still what our dreams are. We need to be able to develop a meaningful way to develop homes and the feeling of home that can be able to be created through creativity and culture. Yeah. Now this, I'm going to transport us to the fourth location, which is on the border of Syria in Jordan. And this is a man named Samir. I'll show you Samir. Samir is an incredible man. And he once asked me, he's our lead teaching artist, he said, Max, what's the hardest question you've ever been asked? So I don't know, Samir, that's a difficult question. And he said, and I said, how about for you? He said, when my 4-year-old son asked me, why are people trying to kill us? When they were fleeing, he got shot 3 times, in the neck and in his back when he was fleeing. And that when he got across, he said, we didn't have even enough water or food to feed my children. He said, but every day is better than the last. I said, what makes you say that? He said, because we are still alive. And that this is what gives my life meaning. My life, whether it be being able to build a giant suit of percussion, we call it percussion armor, to be able to perform with, or being able to work with special needs children, which is this mural that we created here. We had hundreds of kids that he's been able to work with and change their lives. And these are the murals that Samir and our team are able to lead up all the way till today. When you look at these remarkable pieces, it is an astounding nature of the talent and the drive and the incredible nature that already exists in communities across the world. It just needs to be amplified. It just needs to be able to come to life. And whether we talk about how we use recycled materials, whether we talk about how to tell stories, mental health is not a question. It's something where when we look at it, we have to have joy. People are thirsty to have a reason to have joy in their lives, a reason to have meaning when they wake up in the morning. And we look at the piece that was created by a remarkable combination of Syrian, Palestinian, and Jordanian artists. We can see this image of even in the darkness of night with no electricity that we need to be able to study. And that girls need to be able to study was the idea that they came up with, of you can see coming across, because studying is why we cannot have child labor, which you can see the child inside who's wheeling a wheelbarrow and instead studying with a bird coming out towards the future. Now when we look at this, what does all this mean? What is the future? What is the call to action for the first time in history having a multinational, a multi-country, multicultural artwork that is existing here in the World Economic Forum? What does this mean for the future of the history of the refugee crisis? So in order to create a real sustainable long-term change, we need to be able to bring together governments, private sectors. We have to look at the United Nations and the humanitarian development spheres to look at how can we use arts and culture and the strengths within these communities to be able to catalyze change, looking at strengths rather than weaknesses. And whether we're talking about livelihoods or gender, protection and human rights, within mental health, education, and the environment, we have to find new ways to be able to take some of these different cultures that are already have incredible talent and incredible drive, and we have to use this methodology that we've now developed and saying that the next phase in the history of the arts and education has to come from communities themselves, and it needs to be used to be able to make a shift in really what's possible. So for me, I finished my doctorate at Teachers College at Columbia University, and this is some of the research that we've done. So what is the actual hard evidence? What happens cognitively for children when we look at being able to have a pre and post evaluation of actually how do people feel after they're able to be involved in an arts program, many for the first time in their lives? We see that when we look at feeling good about myself, right, self-esteem, we saw it rise by 21.4% in a longitudinal study that we did. When you feel valued and appreciated by others, social connectivity, this rose by 28.6%. That's a huge rise. And we look at the relationship building and being able to connect to others. This was able to rise by 22%. We're seeing these huge rises that really focus on both psychosocial well-being, social and emotional learning, and really looking at indicators on behaviors that are able to shift. So being able to say, yes, we have to do it in the creativity and being able to have the wild performance and creativity that's coming out, but we also need to actually have evidence that backs this up. And we need to be able to show that this needs to be done on a large scale. So when we look at what's possible, I think one of the most important pieces to this is what comes next. What is the call to action that we're looking for? And the call to action is that arts and culture need to be embraced, not as a second thought, but it needs to be at the forefront of the conversation when we're thinking about the global displacement crisis. When we're looking at what's possible, this cannot be something that we think of later on, but rather collecting trash and then turning it into something incredible. Being able to use fabrics that have been cut out to be able to then say, instead of it being thrown away or burned in a factory, we need to make fashion shows. Or we need to be able to look at building, for example, murals all out of buses, and being able to look at new ways to tell stories that can make people care and their hearts be able to open up. Yeah. And when we look at this, whether it be a giant peacock built out of trash and recycled materials, or whether we look at ways of being able to cultivate a completely new response that has not been done before for us, whether it's our work with UNHCR or our work with UNICEF across the world, what we found is that this is something that is being able to catalyze pre-existing needs that are already established within communities. Now, when we look at this, I love this picture, that when we look at this feeling, this orb of light, one thing we talk about is this idea that when we have children who are able to tell their stories, able to have this feeling right here, this is something that is this orb of light that exists inside of each of us. And if you imagine it never stands still. It's always bouncing around, and it's growing, and it's constantly moving, that we see that this orb of light is able to spread, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and that it comes out to the world. And every morning that we wake up, this is the light that we bring into the world. And that this is what we need to do, no matter the sector that we're in, that is the light, that guiding light is what gives our life meaning. And then thinking about what does this mean for Dildar? For this one woman, bringing her here today. For her to be able to tell this story, that now she is leading programs, teaching others how to be able to bring this work to life. And this idea of creativity with a purpose. These are our artists from around the world. And being able to say that purpose gives our life meaning. And that Artolution is not the end, but it's the beginning. That Artolution is something that for us, we truly believe that if we can be able to work with people of all different sectors, that we can be able to mobilize resources and support and relationships, that the arts and culture can hold a different value than it's ever held before. And that what this can mean is that this is truly being able to create something that can have a deep-seated meaning for the future of the history of the arts and education. And this is the color of resilience. So this idea of resilience is something tangible, something we can feel, we can taste, we can smell. This now exists right here for the first time in the World Economic Forum. And being able to have world leaders and change makers saying, this matters. That I video called our team, and there were people with tears in their eyes saying, people care about us. We matter in the world. And if we can find ways to be able to take that significance and amplify that message, there's no greater gift that we can give, and there's no greater value that the arts can have for the history of the world. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes.
I was invited to ask you a tricky question. I know you all had a taste of how contagious Max' enthusiasm and love for what he does is. And I've seen he actually control like 100 children. He made them all quiet and calm. You know, I have kids, I know how hard that is. But also, I have to say something about Artolution, and we made many trips to Bangladesh, me and Max, to actually understand what was important there. And Artolution is a very fund effective NGO, you know, because Max is always ahead of this. He's a hands-on person, and he takes care of everything personally. I don't know how he does it. And I'm profoundly, you know, inspired by him, although I don't have a fraction of the omnipresence that he has. What I want to ask you is, how do you see Artolution growing? How, in a time that you cannot make clones of yourself and spread them all over the world? You mentioned before that we have 100 million people that are displaced, roughly 1.2% of the world's population. You know, it's a huge figure. How do you see that projected from your point of view, from Artolution's perspective? If you could have anything you want, what would you do?
So I would say that we need to scale this to every major crisis context in the world. That whether it be a climate-based crisis, whether it be a human-made crisis, that we need to use the arts to be able to say, this is something that is not on itself alone, that we need to use it to say, we can connect to each other. We can take issues and have communities talk to themselves and to the world about what matters. In my dream, this is something that can connect each other and can connect us here to people who aren't allowed to be here. That it's able to connect the world, and that it's something that will be standardized as a practice from around the globe. And that I want to share one final thing, if I can, is that if I want to bring the Rohingya community into this room. So there's a phrase that we chant, and all the children in the refugee camp chant it. And I want us all to chant it together. So what we do is we say, Akajuka, and then you say, Fari Fari. Okay? That means art, community art. And that feeling is what I want to be able to spread around the world. So if I say Akajuka, you say, let's hear it again. Akajuka, 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 Akajuka. Amazing. And the one thing I'll say, because we have enough time for about one or two more questions, before everyone leaves, is when you go out, we would love to be able to show the work and to talk to everybody and walk through everything that we just discussed in real life. And if you'll believe it, we actually have little fragments that every person in this room can take back with them that are little pieces of the canvas, to have a little piece of this artifact. And every time you look at this, you can think about Dildar, Somira, Yoledimar, Samir, gift, and they can live with you every day as they live with me. And I can tell you, it feels like Atlas on my shoulders to say, how do we truly do justice for these people? How do we make sure that they are living in this room with us? And the real gift is you who are actually taking the time to listen to this. You are the gift. And what you do with this energy, that's the real question. What is our responsibility every single day? So to answer you, it's us. It's us making a change and being able to do it in every crisis context for the future of the history of the world. Thank you. So we have enough. Yes, please.
Firstly, that was a very good presentation. Oh, sorry. Hello. That was a fantastic presentation. I'm going to just have to explain. So I actually work with a charity on the south side of Chicago, the south and the west side of Chicago, and we provide free art classes to underprivileged children and youth in incarceration. So I can vouch for the fact that art is massively important to people's mental health and being able to be seen. But I guess the thing that we're always struggling with is you know, the general world kind of understanding the genuine importance of it and the mental health of it, and not being seen as, to use a derogatory word, arty-farty, or, you know, it's just that little thing over there.
Right.
When it's so important. So I'm sure, how have you dealt with that kind of conundrum?
Sure. So I think there's a couple of answers, and I'll try to be very brief. For us, we work across the US as well. We've done a lot of programs with resettled refugees in the US and really in 35 countries around the world. One of the things that we found is you need to integrate different sectors together. So when we look at mental health, there needs to be mental health outcomes that we're discussing, very specific livelihoods, understanding about artists, understanding about how can we advocate for human rights, but looking at other sectors as ways of describing the value of the arts. I think many times when you say just art for art's sake, it's not enough. It's not enough. We need to use the arts as a catalyst to talk about bigger issues. When we're talking about clean water or nutrition or sanitation, or we're talking about the importance of boys and girls being able to get an education, if the arts can do this in a way that both makes us feel, right? I feel very lucky to have seen people who have had an emotional response to some of these stories. If we can make people actually feel, that's the first step. Then we need to cognitively make people believe in this and believe that there's actual qualitative and quantitative data to back this up. And then we have to say, what's the actions that we need to take? How do we get corporations to believe in this? How do we get governments to believe in this? How do we get the humanitarian development sectors to believe in this? And really, it needs to be intersectoral. It needs to be something we pull on different sectors to get people to truly believe in this. And that this is not something that just we have to say. It's something that's being said, let's say, by UNHCR, being said by others who really matter, and saying that if they can say this about us, then that's what the next step is going to be. And I think having someone like Vik being able to introduce means the world. He was one of my greatest inspirations, maybe my greatest inspiration, seeing Wasteland, the film that he made. It changed my life more than almost anything I've ever seen. And then now to be presenting at the World Economic Forum, to represent Dildar and to represent these people. This is something that is unprecedented. And when I tried to explain it to our teams, they said, people care. People want to listen to our stories. And what we have to do is we have to figure out new ways, innovative ways to tell those stories, to actually show that there's evidence and create an evidence-based model. That this is not something that's once or twice. This needs to exist for decades. This needs to exist for the future. And that is what I believe the next stage in history really would be. And so that would be my quick answer to a very long question. I think we have enough for one, am I right, for one more question? Nope, that's it. Okay, amazing. That's it. Please join us. Yes.
We're going to continue the conversation at the mural.
Yep, yeah. So if possible to go outside, and then I would love to hear your comment.